So I'm going to speak this morning from a story in Mark's Gospel. If you were here last Friday, I think it was last Friday, it might have been the Friday before, you might think you preached on this last time. I kind of did, but I preached on it from a different gospel. And there is an aspect of the story in Mark that is not in John. So I've gone back to it. But I wonder what is the windiest place you've ever been. If you were here yesterday, you might have thought it was here, because it was pretty windy as I was putting this together. It was pretty windy. Windiest place you've ever been? The Western Isles, yes. That's probably right. Yeah. And actually, the place that I'm going to say is not that far, actually, from there, because I think the windiest place I've ever been is a place called Malin Head, which is the most northerly point of mainland Ireland, which is only a few miles across the sea to the north of Scotland. And my goodness, it was windy. It was so windy that if you were walking into the wind, you had to kind of bend double. If it was behind you, you gained speed somehow. Hair all over the place. In fact, I put the hood of my cagoule up and tied it as tight as I could to try and keep a sense of being all together somehow. My glasses weren't still on my face. I thought I was going to lose them. And taking a photograph was just impossible. I couldn't stay still to take a photo. And actually, sometimes that's how life feels, isn't it? You're in the middle of that kind of windy place where there is no stillness anywhere. I know what that feels like. I was in a place of that kind of experience last year, and there was no stillness anywhere. Everything was a battle. Everything was a struggle. And we can be put in that place by all sorts of things, as you know. I don't think I'm telling you things that you don't know here. It can be things like anxiety and fear and rejection, grief, lack of work, a lack of sense of feeling worth. Might be relationships that have fallen apart, finances that have suddenly gone wrong. Even moving house, doing something like that, a big change, a big stress, can make us feel these things, can't it? And when the physical wind picks up, like I've just described at Malin Head, what did I do? In effect, I battened down the hatches. You know, I put my hood up and tied it as tight as I could, so there was only this bit showing, trying to anchor my glasses as much as anything. We put big, thick coats on to try and protect against the coldness that comes with it. Gloves, scarves, walking boots, thick trousers, you know, so that actually our movement is hampered a bit, isn't it? You lose the finesse of your fingers in big gloves. We screw up our eyes to try and protect from the dust and the wind. And so the consequence is that actually our vision is limited, our ability to move is hampered, and that's it kind of also the same thing that happens when we're in those kinds of struggles, isn't it? You know, we get restricted and we're not so good at seeing the obvious. Less stable on our feet, you know. So that's the batterings of life, really. And we're going to talk about a time when the disciples were being well and truly battered. And I'm going to read from Mark chapter 6, starting at verse 45. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he, Jesus, was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars, because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed. So the disciples had been with Jesus, they'd been up on the mountainside, and Jesus had just fed the 5,000. Well, 5,000 plus, because it was 5,000 men. So quite a lot more than 5,000 probably. And then Jesus had sent the crowd away, and he told the disciples to go on ahead, and he had retreated to pray. When I spoke about this last time, from the different gospel, and it said that Jesus left them to go on up the mountainside, we had a smile because the actual meaning of that was that Jesus closed the door on them. He left the room. So there's that sense of, actually, he did go away. He retreated to pray. And the gospel tells us, Mark tells us, that the disciples were rowing, straining against the oars. And these were fishermen. They knew this lake. They knew this water. They knew what could happen. And they were used to rowing, but the wind was against them. And you might have thought, well, why didn't they just go with the wind then, rather than battling the wind? Why didn't they just go with the wind? Well, they'd have ended up in the wrong place, wouldn't they? Jesus had said, "I'll meet you there." That's where they wanted to go. And when Mark says that the disciples were straining at the oars, he uses a word that in the Greek literally means torture. That's how far they were straining. They were tortured in this labor of trying to row against the wind. And can you imagine the weariness that's creeping in quite quickly, I imagine? The torture of the straining muscles, trying to make any sense of progress against the wind. No let up. And I don't think we need to be in a boat on the lake in the middle of a storm to know something of what they were going through, something of what they were feeling. Now, Mark says that was going on later that night, the meaning being evening. Jesus saw them from where he was praying, and if you know anything about Galilee, the hills around Galilee, you could pretty much see something on the lake. Although it was dark and it was stormy, I suspect Jesus had more than a physical sight to see them. There was a spiritual knowing that was going on as well. He knew that they were in trouble. And yet it says, later that night. In fact, when we read on, it says the fourth watch. That's somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning. How long were they out there struggling? And what was Jesus doing while he was watching them struggle? Maybe he was praying for them. Just maybe he was praying for them. But he comes to them. He obviously has a sense that they're coming to near the end of their ability to stay upright, and he comes to them. But he comes to them on the water. Now that would be enough to freak you out, wouldn't it? Really. Out in the middle of a storm, physically exhausted, terrified out your wits, and then you see a figure walking on the water. And it does say, they thought he was a ghost and they were terrified. And it speaks of an agitation within. John actually, when he spoke about this, used the word that we get phobia from, terror. But actually, Mark uses a word that speaks of this deep disturbance, this deep agitation, an inner torment. And I bet you know how that feels too. So much of these stories relate to us, don't they? We can relate to them. But to give them their due, they were battling mega winds. They were trying their best to get to where Jesus had said he would meet them. They were battling with the sea, trying to stay upright, trying to go where they were told to go. No wonder it was a struggle. And as the figure comes closer, the voice says, "It is I, do not fear." And I find it really fascinating that they did not recognize the figure, but they do recognize his voice. Isn't that interesting? Their sense of hearing the voice was more familiar than their physical sight of recognizing him. And I think so often when we're in those kinds of battles, we are better at hearing him than maybe seeing him, possibly. Maybe he did. Maybe he did have his cagoule on and his hood up and they just didn't recognize him. Maybe they did. So what does Jesus do? He climbs into the boat and the wind dies down. Fascinating. It's interesting that I wonder these things. Did the wind actually die down? Or did their perception of the wind die down because now Jesus was with them? Does it matter? Does it matter? I don't know that it does matter, actually, whether the wind actually lessened or whether, because he was with them, their sense of proportion had changed and actually they didn't perceive it to be so bad because Jesus was with them. And that's what he brought, that kind of courage and peace. And they were going to get through this. Their hope was restored, wasn't it? Hope was restored. But we've missed something. What have I missed out in talking through these verses? Did you notice? And this is the difference between Mark's version and John's version. He didn't say anything, no. I don't know whether he did in John, actually. He does in some stories say, "Winds be still," yeah. It was in verse 48. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them by. If they hadn't seen him, would he have gone on by? Isn't it a strange line? He was about to pass them by. I think our automatic understanding of that phrase is sometimes what I'm ashamed to tell you I do in the supermarket. If I haven't got very much time and I see somebody who I know that's going to keep me for half an hour, I dodge behind the do you all do that? I haven't got time today. I'm just going to nip around here and then I won't be seen. Is that what he was doing? If they don't see him, maybe, he'll just pass on by. That sense of ignoring. And then, of course, you go around the next thing and you meet the very person that you were trying to avoid and, hello, oh, hello. Thinking, I do hope you didn't see me just now. Anyway, I read the commentaries to see what they had to say about this, because it's such an interesting phrase, isn't it? He was about to pass them by. And what I discovered was that it is an Old Testament phrase about passing by. Does it ring a bell? When God was about to pass by. What about when Moses hid in the cleft of the rock? Why did he hide in the cleft of the rock? God didn't want him to see his face because his glory was going to pass by. Okay, so that's one. Another one. One of my favourite guys. Who's that going to be? Elijah. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And then, you know the scriptures, a great and powerful wind. The rocks were shattered. The Lord was not in the wind. There was an earthquake, not in the earthquake. Fire, Lord wasn't in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. God passed by, and his glory was revealed. So if we apply that to this story of Jesus being about to pass by, what do we get from it? Well, I think it's the opposite of what our first instinct is, that Jesus was going to ignore them. It isn't. It's about being noticed. Because when the disciples realized who it was, they felt different. They invited him into the boat. Things changed. Things happened. The wind settled, and they got there safely. It's about Jesus revealing himself to us and encouraging the faith within us. So when Jesus was about to pass by, he was not ignoring them. He was saying, look at me. Look at me and see what I can do in this situation for you. In the situations of the disciples in the boat, it's easy to get fixated on the height of the waves, isn't it? The strength of the wind. How much water's coming overboard? Are we going to tip? Coping out of our own resources, coping out of our own strength. And then relying on him when we get to the end of ours. I think this story says, look for those moments when Jesus is about to pass by, and call on him. Let him raise that faith within us, because then he steps in and makes the difference. So where in today is Jesus going to be about to pass by for you? You need to keep your eyes open and watch.